Hello students, I'm Professor Benavides. Let's go over chapter 2, variables and simple data types. So this is a long chapter, but we'll squeeze it all in there. Don't worry about it. Now, before we get started on this chapter, I wanted to alert you to the cheat sheets that your author has online at the author's website. They're really kind of good. This is what one of them looks like. And this one just has a little bit of everything on there. It's kind of like almost like a summary of the entire class almost. As far as this chapter is concerned, chapter 2, he lists some important things that you should know with reference to variables and strings. First of all, he shows you how to print out hello world using the print function. He shows you how to assign a string literal to a variable, a string variable, and then print it using the print function. And then he introduces F strings, which is something that's new that just came out. I believe it was in Python 3.7. It's really good. There are older ways of accomplishing the same thing. I want to go over some of those older ways in case you see them. But an F string is simply a way of formatting a string. So in this case, we see that Albert's assigned to first name, Einstein's assigned to last name. And then what we do is we use these little placeholders that are curly brackets, and we put the variables in the placeholders, and then we put the little letter F or a big letter F outside of the double quotes. And what that does is it will format that string and allow us to print out that string in this manner. I'll go ahead and give you some demonstrations. There were a lot more things covered in chapter 2. I just wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about the cheat sheets. You can just access them by going to the publisher's website or the author's website for his book. Okay, so let's talk about variables and strings. We're going to go ahead and see this happen not only at the Python interpreter, but also within files that end in py. The py indicates that it's a Python program, and you really should know how to deal with both situations. So variables, what we want to do is that every variable is connected to a value, and we can change those values. That's why they're called variables. So let's start off with a really simple, explanation or demonstration of this. I'm going to start Sublime, and let me just go ahead and do a real simple demo. I'm just going to call this, we'll call this hello world. Now, if you want the syntax, highlighting, coloring right away, what you could do is just go ahead and save your file right away before you start typing. So I'm going to go ahead and call this hello world. I have a file called that already here, but I'll override it. And we'll just start off with a message. We'll create a string called message. And I'm going to use double quotes, or I could use single quotes. It doesn't really matter. I want to put the capital W, but he uses lowercase, so I'll just go along with him. So if you run this, of course, nothing happens, right? Or nothing shows to the output screen. You're going to have to use the print method, print function, and I'll discuss the difference between a function and a method just a little while, and pass it the variable. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that again. Control B, hello Python world. So when you're creating variables, there's some rules that you should pay attention to. You can't start with a number. You cannot have spaces. You cannot use keywords. Keywords are listed in some appendix somewhere in the back of your book. So there are some guidelines, and the guidelines means that you won't get a syntax error, but it's not the way we write Python code. Our style is to create variables in lowercase, and if there's more than one word, you use the underscore to separate them. Anything other than that is not complying with the conventions or guidelines that we use in Python. Okay, so one of the things that beginners end up seeing are syntax errors. Let's go ahead and create one. I mean, if you're a human being, you can misspell things. Like right now, let's see if I misspell message and I just call it like that. Right now, notice how I don't get any kind of feedback on this. That I have a problem. I'm just going to go ahead and run it. And let's look at the traceback. Traceback says, hey, something went wrong on line 2, and I've got a name error. Now, what is a name error? It's a very common, situation on here, and it can happen for different reasons. Usually means that either you forgot to set the variable's value before using it, or we made a spelling mistake when entering the variable's name. In other words, it can't find it. It doesn't know what MESAGE is. It doesn't exist. Okay, that's why it says here name error. Name message is not defined. Okay, so how would I fix this? I can spell it right by putting an S on here. I can go misspell the variable. Work backwards on there. It doesn't matter. Either one of those will fix it. So I'm going to go ahead and fix it, and I have fixed it. And that's how you work with traceback. A traceback allows you to see your error, and it tells you what line number your error is on, and so you should get an idea as to what the problem is. So variables, the way we should think of them is that the best way to think of them is that they're labels that you can assign values to. You can say that a variable references a certain value. Many times people say that variables are often described as boxes, and that's okay when you're first starting out, or that you're putting something in the box. It's helpful at first, but to be more accurate, we want to, in terms of how the variables are being represented internally in Python, we want to go ahead and think of them as labels that you can assign values to. So when you get stuck on stuff, the author of your book throws a whole bunch of ideas in Appendix C. So I recommend that you look that up. Remember, Appendix A shows you how to install Python. Appendix B shows you how to deal with text editors or install text editors, and Appendix C deals with what do you do when you get stuck. That's what Appendix C is all about. So let's talk a little bit about strings. So what is a string? A string is simply a series of characters. Anything inside the quotes is considered a string, and you can use either single or double quotes in Python. You can't do that in other languages. This is very unique. Okay, so this is allows us for a lot of flexibility when we're working with strings, especially when we're working with quotes and apostrophes and all that kind of good stuff. Okay, so when you're working with strings, many times you're working with methods, and let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to create another file here so I can have various files I can be working with. File, new file, and I'm going to go ahead and save it, and I'm just going to call it main. .py. Don't forget the py. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say name, and he uses Ada Lovelace, and I'll go ahead and use that. Very important name in the history of computing. So I assign this string to a variable called name. Name is a label that references this information. Okay, so if I want to print it, I could just, I've already shown you how to do that, but I want to show you how you can use different methods to show the data. So let's say print and we'll say name dot title. Now, what does that do on here? What we have here is we've got a function, and the function is called print. Name is a string, and after that, I put in a period, and I put in a method after that. Let me go ahead and run to see what it looks like. See, what it does is it highlights it. Excuse me. What the title method does is it prints out that string using title case. All right. Other methods are print name dot upper. I could have sworn that the methods would have had a different color. I don't know why they're coming out white, because my memory is telling me that this was a different color. So I'm just a little puzzled by that. Let me put in another one, and then we'll talk about it. All right. So the upper method prints that string in all caps, and then lower prints it in all lower case. Now, interesting thing if you want here is well, the interesting thing here is that it was already put in title case, so it represented it back the same way. I think the more interesting thing to do here is let's play around with it here. Let's put it in lowercase. Well, of course, then the lower would still show it as lower. So either way you look at it, it works. It works out. So when do you use the word function versus the word method? Okay, so when you have a command like this, where it's a standalone command, and you pass it an argument, that's referred to as a function. When you have an object, or a variable in this case, and you use the dot operator or a period, and then you provide it with a function, we'll call it more appropriately a method. Now, this method has the same little parenthesis, and when you use this dot operator here in conjunction with the object, we will use the word method for this title method. We call this the title method, and then the print function. Okay, that's just to be more precise, but some people mix these words up anyway. So a method is an action that Python can perform on a piece of data, and we use the dot operator after the name to tell Python to perform a particular kind of action. So we typically put in the parentheses some kind of additional information, but it's not necessary. Okay, so in this particular case, we're using it. We're not passing any information on here. Let's try another little quick demo. File new, and I want to go ahead and call this. Save it as. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and call this full name. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of variables. So we'll have first name, and then we'll have last name. So you want to be copying this style of programming. In other words, if you were in other languages, that you may have different conventions. In Python, we use the underscore to separate two words for in the variable name. Okay, so right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the F string with the older way of formatting things. And well, there are many other ways, okay, of formatting this. So let's go ahead and just take it one step at a time. So I'll say full name. In this particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an F string. So the way I create an F string is this way. I put the little letter F or the big letter F. Usually I put the little letter F and then I put the string. And in the string, I'm going to put the placeholders. The placeholders are where we're going to put the variables. And we put them in these curly brackets. So I'm going to put in the first placeholder and I'm going to put in a space to separate them and then put in another placeholder. So those are placeholders, guys. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put first name. Notice how I just used the tab key to put it in, and then last name. All right. So if I want to print that, I have to send it to the print method, but I'm not finished yet. Let me go ahead and build this a little bit more. Let me build a little message out of this. And I will create a another F string and say hello, comma, and then what I'll do here is I will put in a placeholder here, and I'll say full name dot title. Okay. If you want, I can go ahead and just throw in the print here and pass it full name. And then let's just go ahead and print it again. Message. Okay, so that's what we're going to go ahead and do, and then we'll play with it a little bit more. So let me go ahead and do a Control B, and it's the first time around. It says you know, out of Lovelace, and the second time around I concatenate hello. I put in a string and not concatenate. It's not. But it acts like concatenation, and there I said that word concatenation. We used to do that in the previous versions of Python. He doesn't discuss that, and by mistake I looked up the older book, the first edition of the book, and he uses concatenation, and I said by mistake. I thought I was looking at the new book, and I was looking at I was seeing some code in there. I said, well, look, this doesn't look like what's in the book. It's because it's the first version of that. And I'll talk to you about concatenation in just a minute, but let me just finish this idea. Notice how I use white space to sort of like, you know, separate my ideas. I want to go ahead and show the one of the older ways of doing this. This will just override the previous variable. So we'll just say full name, and we'll say, in this case, this format is a little funkier, and what we're going to do is we're going to compare this with the other one, and you tell me which one you think is easier. So I'm going to go ahead and put in curly brackets, space. Without that space, then the names would go together. Another curly brackets, and then look at what I do. This is being treated as an object. So when I put in the period, I'm going to use the format method, and I'm going to pass it first name and then last name. Now what that does is it puts first name in the first placeholder and last name in the second placeholder. So which one do you like better? Do you like this one, or you know, do you like line 4 better or line 9? Of course, I still have to print it. And you know, let's go ahead and do that. And as you can see, it pretty much does the same thing. If I wanted to add the title on there, I'm just going ahead and add it on here. And I could go ahead and then just copy this. You gotta get, you know, copying can help you or it can hurt you if you don't do it right. You know, I want to compare those two ways and just add the title method on here. Okay. So let's run this again. And as you can see, the second time that it's printed, it utilizes the title formatting. Okay, so these are called F strings, and they were introduced in Python 3.6. I thought I think I said earlier that it was 3.7. No, it's 3.6. We should be in more advanced Python installation, so it should be no problem. And it's kind of rare that someone will be running an older version of Python anyway, but it's a matter of historical significance that the F strings were. And the reason why you want to know that is that just in case you have a really old version of Python, this is not going to work. You're going to get an error message if you use an F string. Okay. Concatenation. Let me talk a little bit about concatenation. I guess I could throw it in here, or let's just start a new demo rather than mixing all kinds of stuff up. I like to keep things really simple. I'm gonna do a file save as. It's not in your book. You're not going to be responsible for it, but I worry that if you only learn one way of doing things and then you look at some other code and you see the other code, you're not going to, you're going to be a little bit mystified or say, well, we didn't cover that, kind of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and call it strings underscore concat. That's good enough. And so let's do first name. And then let's do last name. And then we're going to concatenate that, which simply means join, right? So this is the way it was done in the old book. And I found this by mistake because I was looking up the solutions to the second book. And I was looking at the old book by mistake. And I said, this is not in the book. So, and this is the way you'll do this in other languages. If you have, background in Java or C++. So it's not, this is a C-based language anyway. So a lot of times you find that programmers will try stuff that they've learned before. So if you know how to do this in another language, it'll work, definitely. Until you figure out the Python way of doing this with F strings, which is the way to go, So let's just go ahead and try this out. What we're going to use is we're going to use the plus sign for concatenation. And then we're going to concatenate a space. Whereas before we just ended up putting the space inside of the string that was a formatted string. And then we'll use the plus sign again for a concatenation of the last name. Okay, let me go ahead and run that. Oh, I need to send that to the print function. And oops, I didn't want to choose that one. So I'm using the down arrow to select that and then press the tab key. And then I can do Control B to run, and I've got my output. And you can continue doing the equivalent that we learned the previous demos. It's just, you tell me if you think it's more work. Let's try it out here. If you say print, remember we did something like this, hello, comma, and then to concatenate, we're going to have to use the plus sign and say full name dot title. And then we're going to have to concatenate the exclamation. Did I use the exclamation before? Let me see. Hello, I forgot it. So let me put that in there, and let me run that so you can see it. Oops, got a little error on there. Now let's try and see why that happened. And that happened because you can't put the exclamation point inside of the curly bracket. Yep. So you gotta get it out of there and go right outside. But it's gotta be inside the string for sure, but it can't be in the curly bracket. So let's run that again. And there we go, success. Great little demo, not by, I didn't do it on purpose, but I guess I was trying to type too fast. So the spaces, you just put in a space. You don't have to like put in a double quote kind of thingy on here. So let's go ahead and compare that with this other one here. So let's run it. And I've got a problem on this one. Yeah, this is great. Why are we having a problem on line 6? We've got a syntax error, and because when we concatenate, we've got to concatenate a string. Is that a string? A string is in single quotes or double quotes. So you've got to go ahead and do that. See? There's my little exclamation point to compare it, with the other one on here. My exclamation point is still in the string. Let me do a control B. Yep. And there it is. It's working just fine. Comparing it with this one, very similar idea on here. So you can go ahead and just use the print function to do something like this. What some people like to do is they like to store it in a variable and then send the variable to the print function. So you could do, I'm going to cheat a little bit. Watch what, look what I'm going to do. I'm going to get this, and I'm going to do a control C and come down over here. I'm going to say message gets control V, and then I'm going to say print message. Okay, so the comparison here is that this does the same thing all in one line, and it's okay if it's a small, but sometimes you may have a really long string that's been formatted in a particular way, so you're better off putting it into a variable name and then printing the variable. Let me go ahead and run that, and there we go. We get the same thing again. Okay, exactly the same because I copied it and put it into a variable and then printed the variable. Okay, so that's a demonstration of concatenation that he uses in the old book, the first edition of his crash course, in Python. All right, so the next topic here is adding white space to strings with tabs and new lines. So white space refers to any non-printing character such as spaces, tabs, end of line symbols. You can use white space to organize your output so it's easier for users to read. So we'll cover the tab, new line. There's a lot more, but I think that's the only ones that he uses. Now this is we're going to use backslash. Let's make sure we're talking about /t, /n, not slash. And I'll show you that it's easy to get. Well, some people get them mixed up, on here. So let's go ahead and talk about white space a little bit. So I'm going to go File, New, and I'm going to go ahead and just save this right away. And I'm going to just call it white space. PY. So let's just print Python right away. And then below that, we'll say print. And we will do, let's try the single quote this time. And we'll go /t Python. All right. And then he doesn't do this in the book, but I'll do it here. Instead of doing a /n inside of the string, I'm just going to say print. That'll give me a blank line, which is the same thing. And then we'll say print. And in this particular one, we'll say languages, colon, and then we'll do /n Python, /n C, and /n JavaScript. Very important languages today. And like I said, he doesn't cover it in the book, but let's just go ahead and contrast. I want to contrast using print by itself versus the /n. And then let's just do this one more time on here, but let's use tabs. And I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to get that, do a control C, control V. And in addition to the new line character, I'm going to go ahead and do a tab. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the C on here. So we have /n right after Python. And then we're going to go /n again. Color was messing me up a little bit. And then we're going to do that again. Here we have /n. Oh no, we don't want backslash n. We want backslash n backslash t tab. Backslash n backslash t for a tab. And we'll contrast those out. So let me go ahead and run this now. So we've got Python and then Python tabbed out once. Then I have a blank line. Then I say languages, and I go ahead and have a new line. Notice how it's right underneath. I could have done a whole bunch of prints, right? I could have said print Python, print C, print JavaScript. Or you could use these escape codes. That's what these are referred to. They're escape codes, escape characters, which allows you to go ahead and print a new line. I print another blank line, and then not only do I print a blank line, but I go ahead and indent for languages. We have Python, C, and JavaScript. Okay, so that's the output down below. Small, and I modify the stuff that's in the book a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit. One of the if I haven't done so, or maybe I didn't do it, is distinguish when to use single quotes and double quotes. Let me come back to that idea here, and then this would say, because this may not be apparent to you, so let me go ahead and say message 2, and then I'll say hello friend. Okay, that is using single quotes, right? So you'll say print message 2, right? Do a control B, so it says hello friend. Maybe should I put a period on the? I'm so I believe in periods, so I'll put a period, right? So control B, we got it, right? So, but what about when I want to say, use a single quote inside of there? Let's try something. Let's see what will happen. And so, that doesn't seem to be working out, guys, does it, right? Why? Because it thinks that I'm trying to close the string right there. So how in the world can I do this? Well, I could use an escape code, which is a more complicated way of doing things, which is the way you probably would do it in other languages like Java. Or what you could do is say, hey, you know what? This is single quotes. Why don't I just go ahead and use double quotes for the string so that it won't get mixed up with that single quote in the middle? And I could probably do the same if I wanted to do double quotes around something, just to give you an idea. Since I'm putting periods on everything, right? If I wanted to emphasize my, see what happens here? Oh, but see, whoa, look at the funny color on there. Let's go ahead and run that to see what's going to happen. Okay, so let's message 3, and let's do the print message 4. You wouldn't get that funny color for nothing. Okay, so I'm getting an error message on line 4. So I'm going to take this off here. It doesn't like that, does it? So can I reverse my logic on here? Maybe. Let's try it. And I'm not using the escape. I don't know. I don't like escape codes too much. Let's try this one out. Yeah, it seemed to work. Okay. Yeah. Oh, but that's single quotes. What if I wanted double quotes? Oh, you may say, hey, you know what? If I wanted double quotes, then I could use the single quotes over here, right? Yeah. If I wanted double quotes here, I could then use a single quote here on the outside. Kind of like the reverse of the other logic, isn't it? Let's see if that works. Yeah. He is my friend, right? The escape code for this would be the backslash, and it just looks awkward to put the backslash on there. So let's just, this is if you play around with your double quotes and single quotes, alternating them, you should be able to solve the problem that you have without using these awkward escape codes. But they're in the chapter if you want to look at it. Now we'll talk a little bit about the fact that strings are immutable. So let's go ahead. That means they can't be changed. So let's go, and that's really covered probably indirectly with talking about stripping white space. And this is done, he does some examples at the Python interpreter, and then he goes and does an example. You know, I think he does it using the a text editor. But if I wanted to follow along with him, let me just go ahead and follow along with him, because he does use the command prompt. So let me go ahead and go to the command prompt. And there's a way to get to the command prompt from inside of your editor, but it doesn't seem to be as responsive as the real thing. So the idea here is that, you know, let's just go ahead and issue it, and I'll give you the idea. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is get into Python. All right, I'm there. So then I want to go ahead and say favorite language. Gets Python, of course, right? And then space, 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 close it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to simply issue the word, or see what's inside the variable. Now you could, this is kind of good, and I think he does this because you can see what's inside the variable a little bit better, because you've got these single quotes around it. You won't get that when you do that inside the editor. So I can understand why he's using this as a demonstration, is because this variable called favorite language, it's a string, but it's got some white space at the end of it. So when you print it, if you were to print it in the editor, you probably wouldn't see that white space on there. Okay, so it's a good demo to do it this way. So what he wants to do now is to use something called rstrip, which will strip the white spaces on to the right of this. So let's go ahead and say favorite. I could just press the up arrow key and then put in the period and then rstrip. And now that's going to strip out the right side, all that white space on the right side. Okay, so I press enter, and then look what it does. It returns all that white space gone. Now, the reason why I say that the strings are immutable, and he doesn't really use that word. He just says the above was removed temporarily. Why? Why is he saying the word temporarily? Because if I go back and see what's inside of the favorite underscore language variable, I notice that it still has the white space. So, you know, other people would say that this is just a demonstration in the fact that the string really was not changed. The contents of the string was not changed. So the rstrip simply manipulated the string and did not change the original value. So to remove the white space from the string permanently, you have to associate the stripped value with the variable name. So what he does is, let's see now, is he'll do this. we have a variable called favorite language. We know that it's got that string in it with the white space. What I could do is this. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to issue the rstrip method that's going to act on favorite underscore language, and it's going to assign that value to the original value. Okay, so let me go ahead and issue that command. Traceback. Let's see, we've got a, did I misspell something? Remember we said it's not defined. So how did I misspell this? Let's go ahead and see if I can find this. So what did I do? So favorite, Language. It's not defined. Do they mean this one or that one? Let me see. Favorite underscore language. Oh, look at this. I did not look at that. I misspelled that word. Okay. Is it spelled right now? Yes, it is. So let's go ahead and try this. Excellent. Doing some excellent demos, not by design. Just so now when I see what's inside of favorite language, and notice I'm using the up arrow key, it has been modified because I had to do an assignment statement to change the actual variable. Okay. And we had a chance to visit, syntax errors and along the way. We're becoming, I think, intimately familiar, with the name error, syntax error. And remember, it happens when either the variable doesn't exist, you misspelled it, you didn't make an assignment to the variable, so you've got to spell things right or misspell them, so that they're match up. Okay. So now let's go ahead and talk a little bit. Let's see. I think I think that's about enough about this. String stuff. We should probably be going into numbers. So let's go ahead and talk about numbers now, because I think I beat that horse pretty good. Simple math can be done with addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Note that integer division results in floating point, which is different for this language. If you're coming from, say, for example, Java, you'll find out that integer division results in truncation. So that's not the case here. And that Python uses two multiplication symbols to represent exponents. And of course, Python supports the order of operation. And you can use parentheses to modify the order of operation. Okay. So let's talk about the difference between floats and integers. A float is just floating point. An integer doesn't have the floating point. It's just a whole number. Think of the integer as a whole number. So Python calls any number with a decimal point a float. Okay. This term is used in most programming languages, and it refers to the fact that a decimal point can appear at any position in a number. Okay. So he does a couple little demos here. Like, say, for example, if I add two floats together, I end up with a float. So let's take a quick look at that. 0.2 plus 0.1 gives us this number here. And he says, don't be worried about that number in the far right, that we will talk about that later on in the book. But for our purposes, that is sufficient precision. 0.2 plus 0.3 gives us 0.3. 0, 0, 0, all the way on there. A little bit of rounding error due to the size of that data type. Okay. So remember, when you divide any two numbers, even if they are integers, the result is a whole number. You'll even if the integer, excuse me, let me say that again. When you divide any two numbers, even if they're integers, the result is a whole number. You'll always get, even if they are integers, spit it out, you'll always get a float. So let's just do some demos. So what do I got here is if I divide two integers, this would be very different in Java. I get 2.0, I get floating point. So I'm going to say even if they are divided into two integers, even if they, any two numbers, even if they are integers, you know, so you'll always get a float. Okay. A couple more examples. Promotion, doesn't call it promote, that's what it is. If I have an integer and I add a float to it, what do I get? It gets promoted to a float. It goes up the ladder, doesn't go down the ladder, right? So it always becomes the higher data type, and that's referred to as, you know, promotion on here. The book talks about, well, let me talk about something that was in the old book, because you may end up, let me go back and revisit concatenation. I'll come back to this. And because you may encounter this. Remember, this is not going to be on your test. I just want you all to be aware of some of the older ways, and maybe you'll appreciate better this F string that the author is I'm going to say pushing on you, promoting, you know, on here. Let me just go ahead and show you how we used to do a few things, you know, in the past. Let's just call this happy birthday. Save this, and I'll call it birthday. I'll just call it birthday. So I'll go ahead and say age gets 23. And then I'm going to go ahead and create an error. This time I'll alert you to it, right? Instead of just making them myself. So happy space. And you'd think that you could just go ahead and concatenate age, right? And then add more string to it. So we're going to just go ahead and see what happens here. I get an error. It's a type error, and it's on line 3, and it says can only concatenate string, not int to string. So it doesn't like the fact that I'm concatenating this. You know, with the F string format, all we have to do is put it in a little placeholder and we're good to go, right? But in this one, in order to fix this, I've got to convert that number to a string with a string function. str pass age. And this is in the old book. And like I said, I found this by mistake because I thought I was reading the new book solutions and I wasn't. So now I'm able. So I'm just providing this because, you know, you may see this in older code, and when you first start off coding a lot of times you may end up maintaining code or updating old code from the past. So chances are pretty good that you'll see this. Are there other ways of doing this? Yeah, there are. Unfortunately, there's lots of ways of dealing with strings. Some books have entire chapters on all the different ways of manipulating strings. Now, another thing that the next topic on here is large numbers. And this was kind of neat because let's say you have a really large number that you got to put in a variable. Now, you may get mixed up with all the zeros. So this is one of the things that can be done. is that we can go ahead and say universal age, whatever that is, or universe age, excuse me, yeah, universe. We won't talk about that, whether you believe that to be true or not. Or maybe I shouldn't even have said that, but let's just assume that this is the age, right? Look at what I'm doing. I'm using an underscore here. Like, this is a lot easier to do because in my brain, I can separate these numbers better, right? I can see this better. So when I say print, it prints out right. Or I could just say, so when you don't necessarily have to use the print command when you're in a terminal window like this, but it's okay to use it if you want. So when you're making the assignment statement, you can go ahead and use the underscore when you're making your assignment statement. This is a really nice little feature. You can also go ahead and have multiple assignments. I don't particularly like this. I think that, especially as a beginner, you should have one variable on one line, next variable on the next line, etc. But let's just go ahead and try that out. We're going to have X, Y, and Z variables. And we're going to assign, I was going to assign, I think he assigned zeros to them, but I'll just go ahead and say 5, 10, and 15. So if I want to see what's inside of X, it's got 5, Y, 10, Z has got 15. Like I said, I prefer to do them all, one per line, but we can go ahead and have multiple assignments. Constants, we don't have constants in Python. And this is more meaningful to people that come from other languages. Like if you're coming from Java, or C++, that there's a constant is something that doesn't change. It's not a variable, right? A variable is called a variable because it can be changed. And what would you put in a constant? Things you don't want to change. Let's say you're going to give everybody a 5% raise. You probably would be better to put that into a constant. Now, we can still use the conventions. So the convention is constants should appear in all caps. We can still use that convention, but we will be able to modify and update and change the constant. Okay. So again, the convention in programming is that constants, when you create them, that they be all capital letters. Let me go ahead and demonstrate that. I'm going to go new file on here, and I guess I'll save it. And so a variable would be something like age, right? A constant, notice how that was in lowercase, right? I could say my age, use the underscore, but max connections. And I use cap lock underscore connections. Gets 5,000. Okay. So Control B. All right. So so variables were meant to be changed. Variables were meant to be changed. So when I put the double quotes on here, I ended up creating a string. If I want that to be a number and do math on it, I mean, if you want it to be a string, fine. But if you want to do math on it, you need to make it a number, right? So try that again. I probably should have demonstrated that to you, is that age plus 5, that gives me 70. But if this was a string, let's see what happens. traceback error. Line 2. Can only concatenate str not int to string. So it's getting mixed up. Sometimes you get it's getting mixed up because it's a string and you can't add a 5 to it. So basically, age, typically, you know, we're going to want it to be a number, right? So that we can do math on it on here. My connections, notice how it's all caps. That's our convention for a constant. Even though, you know, we have to tell you is that Python does not have built-in constant types, but Python programmers use all caps to indicate a variable should be treated as a constant and never be changed. Right? So we'll be treating it that way. So, you know, just some closing topics on numbers. Let me go ahead and just call this numbers. We'll just do some simple math. It's easy to forget the .py, guys. Yeah. So if you're doing some simple math, you can do something like 5, you know, plus 3. And we can go ahead and say 8 minus 0. And we could go ahead and just do the rest of the stuff on here. 4 times 2. And of course, let's try division, just to do each one of these. 64 divided by 8, right? And do Control B. And there we have it. We have 5 plus 3 is 8. You know, 8 minus 0. 4 times 2 is 8. And 64 divided by 8 gives us a double, not concatenation. Numbers also, remember we use, it's really coming back to the idea of the formatted string, very helpful. Let me just go ahead and get rid of that. And we'll do something like this. Favorite number, get 7. And then we'll put that in a message. Message gets. And we'll use the formatted string and we'll say my favorite. Don't get tempted in putting that variable name in there because that's not where we're going to use it. My favorite number is. And then we're going to use the placeholders and go outside of the placeholder, but inside the double quotes to put the period. Then come back to inside the placeholder and put in favorite number. Now, if you wanted to do that all the way straight, you could on here. And, you know, I could have sworn that on a different computer I had that this color here was was white. I don't know why I'm getting different colors right now. So let's just go ahead and run this to see. And, oh, I haven't printed it. That's kind of neat. So let's say print. And then Control B. My favorite number is 7. The last thing in here is comments. We'll come to the top and we'll put in some general comments. I distinguish between general comments are at the top, specific comments are within the program. And so we can do things, you know, like project name, date, description. And comments are for documentation. So you can go ahead and just fill it in, fill in the blanks. You know, project name, what did I call this? Numbers. And then you can just fill in the rest, right? So those are general comments. A specific comment is when you put comments inside the code, mixed in with the code. Okay. white space is nice to have. It's kind of like makes things a little bit more understanding. Are there other ways of doing comments other than the pound sign? Yes, there is. We'll introduce them at a later point in time. I called it the pound sign. Many people refer to it as the hash mark. So in Python, the hash mark indicates a comment. So anything following the hash mark in your code is ignored by the Python interpreter. Okay. So it's always a good idea to have general comments at the top and specific comments that explain what you want done. All right. And so that's pretty much the end of the chapter. One of the things that he does at the end of the chapter was something kind of cool is he prints out the Zen of Python. You can do that either in code or in the interpreter. So what he does is he types in import this. And we'll talk about import statements later on, but when you type in import this, it talks about the Zen of Python by Tim Peters, that beautiful is better than ugly. Some people really think this is important. It pretty much provides the philosophy for the style of coding used in Python and the way in which we code. Now is better than never, although never is often. It just goes on and on and on. This is kind of like a readability counts. I'm pretty big on readability. Now, white space helps with readability. So simple is better than complex. Explicit is better than implicit. A lot of times I get some very complex code from students, and I say, you could have done that a lot easier. So easy code is good to maintain. Complicated code, I know some programmers really love to write complicated code, but it makes maintaining it much more difficult. So summary of the chapter. This chapter, very important. It talked about variables. It also talked a little bit about manipulating strings. It talked about the fact that, strings, you saw it there, are immutable, even though it doesn't use that word. It talked about the name errors and syntax errors. We had a chance to experience those. We manipulated the white space in strings, and we discussed the difference between integers and floats. And we talked about comments and when and why to use. And then finally, we talked about the philosophy of keeping your code as simple as possible whenever possible. So that is chapter 2, my friends. I hope that you found it informative, interesting, and that it provides a good foundation for your programming that will be coming. Thank you very much. Professor Benavides, over and out.